This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. I'm Sophie Ikenye. Our top stories. All 7 bodies of a tour group swept away by flash floods in a Kenyan national park are recovered. Dozens of people have been arrested after riots and looting in parts of Johannesburg, South Africa. Police describe the violence as a national emergency. As election campaigning starts in Tunisia, we ask what's needed for democracy to survive in the birthplace of the Arab Spring. Also in the program, Malawi's president speaks to the BBC. We find out why Peter Mutharika refuses to sack the chair of the Malawi Electoral Commission amid demands for reform.
Why should I ask her to step down? It's very, very clear that the election was fair and credible.
And in sports, it's transfer deadline day in most of Europe's leagues. We've got the latest on who is moving where and who is staying put. Thanks for joining us on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. All 7 bodies of people who drowned in Kenyan flash floods have been found. Hell's Gate National Park in the Rift Valley was hit by heavy rains on Sunday. The park, which is about 100 kilometers northwest of the capital, Nairobi, has been closed. The tourists are thought to have been trapped in one of the park's deep gorges where the floods hit. The Kenya Wildlife Service says the group was made up of 1 local guide, 5 Kenyan tourists and a foreigner. Questions have been raised over the safety of the tourists, but the Kenya Wildlife Service says emergency exits were clearly marked. Ferdinand Omondi brings us the latest from there.
This is the Hell's Gate National Park, a popular site for sightseers, campers, hikers, rock climbers. But it's also the site of an unfortunate event. A few kilometers down the line is where family members lost their lives in a gorge during a flooding. A man who survived the accident explaining how he could do nothing to save the life of his wife and other family members who drowned in the flooding.
Water came out of nowhere. And I had my phone in my hand and I was able to call the guy at the reception desk where we paid the entry fee to go down. And we told him, get this. And the guide next to me also shouted, get tuna bebo na maji. And we thought rescue will come, but nothing. And then next minute, I see family going one after the other.
Many Kenyans who have heard about this incident have expressed their anger and frustration. That's because in 2012, a similar accident occurred when 7 people were hiking were swept away by the floods, and many people asking why that part of the gorge should remain open, especially during this time of seasonal rains when such danger is imminent. But the Kenya Wildlife Service has defended itself, saying that since then it had put measures in place to prevent this occurrence, including training guides and putting in emergency exits, insisting that this was an unfortunate event.
I think we lost seven Kenyans, but since that time I think it was a wake-up call. What we normally do is that we don't, during rainy season, the gorges are no goes on. But you know, like yesterday, we didn't have rain there, but these are flash floods. It rained somewhere, and it just came with that notice. And unfortunately, that's what happened.
In the aftermath of the accident, the gorge where the incident occurred has now been restricted. But the Kenya Wildlife Service says the rest of the park remains open and is assuring visitors of their safety. Ferdinand Omondi, BBC News at the Hell's Gate National Park.
Now, over 40 people have been arrested in the South African city of Johannesburg after rioters looted shops and torched buildings and vehicles. It remains unclear what sparked the rioting, which police have called a national emergency, but it follows a spate of attacks against foreigners in recent months. Police are keen to stress that they think criminality rather than overt racism is behind the violence. Well, the BBC's Nomsa Maseko sent this report from Johannesburg.
A wave of looting swept across Johannesburg today, sparking clashes between groups of people and police who were clearly outnumbered. Shops were vandalized and an entire fleet of cars burned. In several neighborhoods, Mobs forced their way into buildings and stole whatever they could find. A number of them have been arrested. It remains unclear what sparked the violence which erupted in the early hours of this morning. But many South Africans are frustrated at their economic situation and accuse the government of failing to look after the interests of locals.
I blame the government for this violence. The ANC government we voted for. I am not condoning the looting, but if the government doesn't prioritize our needs as South Africans, I'm afraid the violence will continue.
Shopkeepers doing everything they can to salvage what's left of their goods following today's looting spree. Many of the shops targeted belonged to African migrants, but not all of them. Earlier today, Police Minister Bheki Cele condemned the violence, but he insists it's not xenophobia, simply describing it as just pure criminality.
People looting and all that and using that as a xenophobia. But for now, there is nothing that has sparked any form of this conflict between South Africans and the foreign nationals. So we're dealing with criminality rather than xenophobia at the present moment.
The situation remains volatile as looting continues in parts of the city. Nomsa Masego, BBC News, Johannesburg.
Let's now take a quick look at other stories making headlines across Africa and the rest of the world. The most powerful storm to hit the Bahamas since records began, Hurricane Dorian has hit the islands with winds of up to 180 miles an hour, causing huge damage and severe flooding. The Bahamas Prime Minister says it's caused unprecedented devastation and remains extremely dangerous. It's now slowly edging its way towards the east coast of America. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has promised to strengthen the capacity of the peacekeeping force in the Democratic Republic of Congo. He is visiting the country where rebel attacks have hampered efforts to stop the spread of the Ebola virus. 12 people have been arrested following the funeral of a popular Ivorian musician, DJ Arafat, on Saturday. They are accused of storming the cemetery and forcing open his coffin. Since the funeral, videos have emerged on social media showing fans removing the coffin to check his body. DJ Arafat died last month in a motorbike accident. There had been rumors that he was still alive. This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Still to come, FIFA releases its awards list for last season, but do any Africans make the cut? I'm Sophie Ikenye, and you're watching Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Now, election campaigning is now underway in Tunisia as the country gears up to elect a new president. The poll on the 15th of September is being described as the most competitive yet, with 26 candidates. Tunisia was where the Arab Spring started in 2011, protests which would go on to topple a number of authoritarian governments in North Africa and the Middle East. The first free and fair presidential elections for 60 years were held in November 2014 after the toppling of President Ben Ali 3 years earlier. In July this year, the winner of those elections, Beji Caid Essebsi, died, paving the way for new elections. Now, 26 candidates are in the running, among them high-profile figures like Prime Minister Youssef Chahed, the media magnate Nabil Karoui, and former interim President Monsef Marzouki. Well, let's now speak to Youssef Sherif, a Tunis-based political analyst. Thanks for taking time to talk to us on Focus on Africa. How important is this election for the country itself and the region?
It's important because it's the first time that we have so many candidates and that there is a big campaign taking place with a lot of billboards all over the country with, as you say, more than 25 candidates running now. And it's also important because in the region it's the only presidential election with direct voting taking place in total liberty and we will witness free and fair elections for these presidential elections. But there is one thing, it's important, but it's not as important as the elections that are coming right after, which are the legislative elections, which are the elections that will elect the parliament, and the parliament will elect the prime minister, who has more prerogatives than the president. But for Tunisians, the symbolic role of the president is very important, and therefore many Tunisians see actually these elections as the crucial and most important elections, while again, in fact, they are less important than the legislative elections.
So they are looking at this as quite crucial elections. But what challenges does whoever wins, what will he face?
The problem that every candidate faced since 2011, which is the dire economic situation. For most Tunisians, the problem that the country is going through is neither ideological nor political. It's mainly at the economic level. And sadly, not a single candidate can solve these issues, especially that the role of the president is quite limited by the constitution. So we have candidates who are promising a lot of things, but who will end up facing a massive economic crisis, and who will have to continue on the harsh reforms that have been undertaken by the previous governments. And whatever they say in the campaign now, they will not be able to change the course that the country is going through, because by most indicators, it will take a few years before the economic situation improves.
All right, so it might take a few years before the economy improves, but there's a fascinating situation there right now, because one of the candidates who was cleared by the Electoral Commission to run for president is in detention. How did that come about?
He's in detention for almost a week now, and he's actually the favorite among all the candidates, but he's also the most populist among all the candidates, and he's known for a number of issues, be it about tax evasion or about threatening civil society activists, and so on. So he's a very sulfurous candidate. There were a lot of rumors about him and about his dealings, but it is true that the fact that he got arrested in such a short time before the election is an issue, because many people now think that this is a politically motivated arrest, and he's actually not even, there was not even clear charges against him. He's still in temporary detention now.
All right.
So again, you're right, this is a very interesting time to follow Tunisian politics.
Interesting indeed. Youssef Cherif, thanks for taking time to talk to us and Focus on Africa. Thank you. To Malawi now, where the country's President Peter Mutharika has warned opposition parties that his government will use all the necessary force to protect any disruptions at any of the country's airports and border points. And the president was narrowly elected to a second term in office with 38.5% of the vote at the end of May. But the opposition raised concerns over voting irregularities, which has led to protests. One of the opposition's key demands is for the chair of the Electoral Commission, Jane Ansah, to step down. Well, the BBC's Emmanuel Igunza spoke to the president, Peter Mutharika, and began by asking him about the ongoing protests.
The demonstrations are about her resignation, while at the same time, they're in court to change her decision. So that's what the problem is. Suppose the court clears her, that in fact the election was properly managed, and then she has resigned. What's going to happen?
Would you consider asking her to step down?
Why should I ask her to step down?
To pacify the country, to unify the country?
Well, it's very clear. It's very clear that the election was fair and credible. The European Union and even the American government said this election was successful. All these groups have said the election fair, credible, transparent.
There are those who feel that the election was not credible. That's why they have taken to the street.
Okay, that's why they have gone to court. They've gone to court to challenge the results of the election. Why are they going to the streets at the same time? They have to decide. Either they wait for the court verdict, they're already going to court to challenge the decision, why are they going on the streets at the same time? Don't you see the contradiction there?
But you're facing a very divided country.
Well, of course, and there are divisions.
How will you deal with bringing Malawians together?
Well, first of all, I guess we'll have to wait for the results of the case, which will be very soon. And once the case comes out, the results come out, then I think we'll be in a position to see how we bring the country together. But we're already talking, as I say.
Would you consider meeting them, the main opposition leaders, directly?
If there are going to be meetings between me or whoever, there needs to be an agenda. What are we going to be discussing? Are we discussing the resignation of Answer? Well, that matter is already in court. What are we going to be discussing? Are we going to be discussing demonstrations? There are already demonstrations.
Your government has just recently banned demonstration. You said you're not going to allow demonstrations. The Constitution allows for people to demonstrate.
We haven't banned demonstrations. I'm not aware of that. My government is not against peaceful demonstrations. I support. I'm one of the framers of this Constitution. I'm a comparative constitutional lawyer myself. I taught at some major universities in the world. So I believe in the rule of law, but the Constitution does not allow violent demonstration.
Very lastly, Mr. President, what message do you have for Malawians?
Yeah, my message is let's unite. That we had an election, the election, one party won, it's obvious, and that the other party did not accept it. They never have accepted. This is the sixth election.
Malawi's President Peter Mutharika there. You're watching the BBC Focus on Africa. Let's find out what's happening in the world of sport. Peter.
Many thanks, Sophie. And Africans have missed out on all the final FIFA awards list for last season. Football's world governing body has released the 3 name shortlists for the Men's Player of the Year, the Women's Player of the Year, Men's Coach, Women's Coach, Men's Goalkeeping, and Women's Goalkeeper, as well as the Pushkash Award for Best Goalkeeper, for the best goal rather. And no African has made the cut. Cristiano Ronaldo of Portugal and Juventus, Lionel Messi of Argentina and Barcelona, and Virgil van Dijk of the Netherlands and Liverpool, who was last week crowned UEFA Player of the Year, are the 3 names on the men's list, while the women's list consists of UEFA Women's Player of the Year Lucy Bronze, who plays for England and Olympique Lyonnais, as well as Alex Morgan of the USA and Orlando Pride, and Megan Rapinoe, who also plays international football for the USA and her club football for Reign FC. Now, the troubles in women's football in Zimbabwe just won't go away. Over the weekend, the national team refused to play the second leg of their second-round Olympic qualifier against Zambia in Harare. The players are owed allowances from last month's COSAFA Cup in South Africa. Zimbabwe lost the first leg 5-0 after travelling to Lusaka by road without training. The country's FA says there was an agreement in place to pay them and accused the players of breaking a contract. Inter Milan striker Romelu Lukaku says football is going backwards on racism after he was racially abused by Cagliari fans while playing for Inter Milan on Sunday. Romelu Lukaku was subjected to monkey chants while scoring the winning goal in their 2-1 win at Cagliari. It's not the first time fans in the club have made the headlines. Samuel Eto'o, Solomon Tari, Moise Kean and Blaise Matuidi have all suffered racist abuse while playing there in the past. The coach of Inter Milan, Conte, says he didn't hear the chanting, but says other countries have a much better record of racial tolerance. Now, it's the last day of the transfer window in most of Europe's leagues, so let's bring you some of the latest moves. Cameroon defender Aurélien Tcheju is to make a comeback in Ligue 1 in France as he has joined Amiens on a 2-year deal from Turkish club Istanbul Basaksehir. The 34-year-old has already made 2 appearances in the Turkish top flight this season. His first stint in France was with the former French champions Lille, where he spent 6 seasons and won the league in 2011. Former French champions Monaco have sent Mali international Adama Traoré on loan to rivals Metz for the rest of the season. The 24-year-old has already featured twice in Ligue 1 for Monaco this season. Sevilla have signed striker Javier Hernandez on a 3-year deal from West Ham United for an undisclosed fee. The 31-year-old Mexico forward handed in a transfer request on Friday and had flown to Spain for a medical. Hernandez's Hammers future had been uncertain following the arrival of club record signing Sebastian Haller from Eintracht Frankfurt in July. Roma have reached an agreement with Arsenal to sign midfielder Enric Mkhitaryan on a season-long loan. The Italian club will pay a loan fee and the 30-year-old's wages, but there is no option or obligation to buy the Armenia international. Mkhitaryan joined the Gunners from Manchester United in January 2018 in a swap deal involving Chile forward Alexis Sanchez. He has scored 9 goals in 59 appearances for Arsenal. And one person who's staying put, though, is Ghana forward Andre Ayew. The 29-year-old is to remain with the English Championship club Swansea City. Ayew, who was the Swans' record signing when he joined the club in 2015, spent last season on loan at Fenerbahce and had been expected to leave this summer. The 29-year-old said he had received offers from several clubs ahead of Monday's European transfer deadline, but had opted to stay at the Liberty Stadium. Finally, basketball. Tunisia has become the first African team to win a game at the ongoing Basketball World Cup in China after beating Iran 79-67 in their second match. All 5 African representatives at the tournament lost their opening matches. Nigeria, Angola and Ivory Coast have all gone on to lose their second games in the last few hours. Not a very good competition for Africa then, eh?
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Peter. Thanks for the sport. Now, let's meet someone who is using all his ingenuity to help improve mobility for those who find it harder to get around. Just over 4 million people in Kenya are disabled, and many cannot get access to a wheelchair. Lincoln Wamaye uses scrap materials from junkyards to build electric wheelchairs, which he's now testing on the streets of Nairobi. This is his story.
I believe even outside there, we have so many youth who think they can't do something that people will appreciate because they just form for livers or not educated. The secret is just try. My name is Lincoln Wamaye, 30 years of age. I build electric vehicles. I started by making tricycles. It was just like a bicycle with 3 wheels. You could cycle, and it had electric motor to assist when you're cycling. But later, I saw that the disabled people had issues walking, and I decided to convert my tricycle into an electric wheelchair. This is my first prototype. This was my second, and the third one. I completed my first wheelchair 2018 December. It was a total of 3 years. The issue with Kenya here is the materials needed to build them. If I have all the materials, it will take me a day to build one wheelchair. I don't have any training. I just have passion with what I do. When I see it work, it makes me feel nice and motivates me to do something else. I usually get the parts for the wheelchairs from junkyards, but there are those components you must import. My wheelchairs are powered by lithium-ion batteries. I source my batteries from old laptop batteries. So in the process of making my wheelchairs, I'm saving the environment because I'm using e-waste. I'm planning on building some versions that will have solar panels as a roof. I want to see my wheelchairs being produced in large numbers, being sold locally, outside Kenya, and I'll have fulfilled my dreams.
Well, before we go, let's take a quick look at our top story on Focus on Africa. All 7 bodies of those who drowned in Kenyan flash floods have been found. Hell's Gate National Park in the Rift Valley was hit by heavy rains on Sunday. The tourists are thought to have been trapped in one of the park's deep gorges when the floods hit. The Kenya Wildlife Service says the group was made up of 1 local guide, 5 Kenyan tourists, and a foreigner. Questions have been raised over the safety of the tourists, but the Kenya Wildlife Service says emergency exits were clearly marked. Don't forget you can get in touch with me and some of the team on social media. I'm at Kenyan. Thanks for your company.